Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Before I start, I want to let everyone know we're recording this session. So we'll be able to make the recording available after the event. If you're watching live, attending live, you'll be able to get 1 AICP credit for the live version, and we should be able to post it for those of you watching the recorded version, so you can get credit as well. Just look for the recorded version on the AICP website. My name is Jennifer Koch, and I'm a principal planner with Roadside and Harwell, based in Alexandria, Virginia. But today I'm representing the APA Sustainable Communities Division, which is one of, which is the host for today's webinar. This is our first in a series of 2 webinars celebrating the winners of last year's awards for excellence in sustainability. We've got 2 great teams, both out of Michigan, actually, or both projects in Michigan. The Michigan Renewable Energy Development Initiative, which won the Student Award last year, and then the Michigan Economic Development Corporation's Redevelopment REDI Communities Resiliency Toolkit, which won in the Policy, Law, or Tool Award category last year. So really excited to have both groups. If you have any technical issues during the webinar today, just send a chat or a Q&A about it to me, and I'll take a look once I am done with the intro here. Before I get started, we can't not acknowledge our great sponsors. So thank you to all these groups who really help APA SCD put on events like this webinar and the awards, the annual reception, and other events. If you're interested in sponsoring the division, take a look at our website, apascd.com/sponsors, and you can find out more information there. If you want to learn more about the division or contact us, you can see our info here. We'd love to connect with you about any ideas you have for future webinars or upcoming events. Before we get into the real meat of today's presentation, I wanted to just let everyone know that the 2025 awards are now open for nominations, which is really very exciting. The nomination period will be open through January 13th, which is a Monday at midnight Eastern time. We do have, as usual, an information packet posted on the website. So there's lots more information on there. And we're using the same submission website we did last year, which is called Judgify. So if you have not used it yet, you might want to go check it out, sign up for your account, and then you'll be able to start a submission and come back to it any time, and then submit it, of course, by January 13th. This year, we've got sort of a smaller section of awards categories. We wanted to really focus in on the ones that we often get the most submissions for and that we think really showcase really great projects. So you can see 6 of them here. The top 2, State and Regional Award and Community Award, are sort of the based on the scale of community that we're looking at, the larger scale versus the smaller scale. Environment, Climate and Energy, Quality of Life, and Policy, Law, and Tool Awards. Those are more focused on specific topics. And then, of course, the Student Award is focused on student projects. So the jury is able to award up to 1 undergraduate and 1 graduate project each year for those. So we hope you'll consider submitting. You can sign up for e-bulletin if you want to get some reminders about it every couple of weeks. But otherwise, you can check out the website. Lots more information on there. And we'd love for you to submit something or tell someone else to submit something that you think is really interesting. So keep an eye out for those opportunities. But to get into the meat of why we're all really here today, to celebrate these 2 award winners from last year. As I said, we've got 2 projects out of Michigan. We'll have 2 separate presentations before we do the Q&A. So I want to introduce both of the speaking groups first. So first of all, for our second group of speakers, we'll be representing the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or MEDC, their Redevelopment REDI Communities Resiliency Toolkit. So we're lucky to have 3 folks today representing that team. Pablo Mahano is a senior community planner at MEDC, and he works with the Redevelopment REDI Communities team to provide technical assistance support around planning and economic development tools to communities across the state of Michigan. Catherine Clark is a consultant and planner with Smith Group. She works at a range of scales, from regional comprehensive plans to site-specific redevelopment. And through this process, she helped to facilitate engagement to make sure that It involved, a wide-ranging engagement to make resiliency feel approachable, understandable, and engaging. The third speaker for the MEDC project today is Alicia Adams, who is also with Smith Group. She's a dedicated advocate for environmental sustainability and climate action planning. And she's based in Pittsburgh, and working there, she leverages her expertise in landscape architecture and urban planning to integrate open spaces into broader climate strategies, ensuring that those vital resources contribute to community resilience and well-being. So thank you to the three of you. We'll hear from you in just a bit. Before I get into the second group of speaker bios, I just want to note we're doing some abbreviated bios today because we've got lots of great speakers on with us. But if you want to learn more about any of our speakers, go to the AICP CM website. We've got the full bios on there. But next up to our first speakers, Michigan Renewable Energy Development Initiative, or Michigan REDI. We've got 4 speakers on with us today from the student team that won this award. Zona Martin is a departmental analyst at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, where her work focuses on supporting local governments in proactive planning and zoning for utility-scale renewable energy development. Yinqing Wang is a departmental analyst at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, with Zona colleagues, love it, where she manages grants and programs focused on advancing renewable energy initiatives across the state, including Renewable's REDI Communities Award, Renewable Energy Academy, and the Michigan RSTEP program. Sophie Farr is a researcher at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where her work focuses on stakeholder engagement and workforce development to support the growing land-based and offshore wind industries in the U.S. And Sarah Wells is a community decarbonization researcher at Slipstream, where she supports programs advancing building energy efficiency policies like building performance standards and energy codes. Her areas of interest include stakeholder engagement, community education, and workforce development. So if I missed any key tidbits out of your bios, please reiterate them for the group when you're speaking. Don't be shy. But thank you all to all of our great speakers. I'm sure you'll have some questions, all of you that are attending as we go. So as I noted, we're going to keep those questions until the end of the session, but you can submit them anytime via the Q&A tool on Teams. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I will pass it off to our first group, to Zona.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for inviting my team and I to present our project today, which we completed as part of our master's program curriculum through the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. Our project, the Michigan Renewable Energy Initiative, or MyREDI, was conducted in partnership with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. We're excited to share more about this initiative, which supports Michigan communities in creating renewable energy zoning policies that reflect local perspectives and goals. What began as a student project has since grown into a long-term program, receiving roughly $132 million in state funding. Our team has worked on the student portion of this project from 2021 to 2023, and MyREDI's impact has only grown since, with an exciting future that we're going to be sharing shortly. Next slide, please. All right, so to start, I'd like to introduce our project team, starting with Caitlin Sledge and Ian O'Leary, who will not be presenting with us today. And then, as you just heard, the other team members include Sophie Farr, Yinqing Wang, Zona Martin, and myself, Sarah Wells, as well as our outstanding faculty advisor, Dr. Sarah Mills, who has been instrumental in guiding this project to its current success. In today's presentation, we'll begin with an overview of our project's purpose. Next, we'll cover how we used interviews to understand the landscape of renewable energy zoning in Michigan. We'll then describe the program we developed, which centers on resource assessment, community engagement, and zoning assistance for communities. And then finally, we'll share our achievements, give an update on the current state of MyREDI, and offer some closing thoughts. Next slide, please. Okay, so for some background, in 2022, Michigan released the My Healthy Climate Plan, setting ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 52% by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. To reach these goals, 60% of Michigan's electricity will need to come from renewable sources like wind and solar by 2030, which calls for a major increase in utility-scale renewable energy projects across the state. However, expanding wind and solar power in Michigan faces challenges related to siting and zoning. And I do want to make a quick note that when we completed this project in spring of 2023, renewable energy zoning was handled solely by local jurisdictions, although later that year, a new law granted the state some authority over siting. So these processes are a little bit different today, but for the sake of today's presentation, we're going to focus on the local authority model that was in place when the project was developed back in 2021 through early 2023. So at that time, very few Michigan communities had renewable energy zoning ordinances in place, which we referred to as silently zoned. And silent zoning poses challenges. So without clear ordinances, communities might feel pressured to make rushed decisions when approached by developers, which can lead to incomplete public input, project delays, or even halted development. And additionally, without proactive zoning, projects might not fully reflect local interests, resulting in developments that don't align with community goals. And so our project aimed to address these issues by designing a program to help townships proactively zone for renewable energy developments, ensuring that they're prepared for future projects that might come their way that actually meet community needs. Next slide, please. All right, so to shape the MyReady program, we conducted interviews with townships across Michigan to understand local officials' perspectives on utility scale renewables. Specifically, we focused on how renewable energy aligns with community goals around energy, sustainability, and economic development, current public engagement efforts on these topics, as well as prevailing attitudes in the community, existing or planned utility scale renewable energy projects, incentives that can make renewable energy development actually appealing to townships, as well as barriers that might have prevented proactive zoning for renewables in the first place. Next slide, please. All right. And so we selected interview candidates from a pool of respondents to the Michigan Local Energy Survey conducted by the University of Michigan in 2019. And we reached out to those who had agreed to be contacted for future research needs or initiatives like this one. And given the large areas typically required for utility scale projects, we focused only on township level jurisdictions. So we excluded talking to cities and villages for these interviews. From our pool, we identified and contacted 139 township representatives and ultimately ended up conducting 24 interviews. And the locations which we interviewed are shown in red on the figure. So the insights gathered from these interviews, directly shaped our program structure and the services that we aim to offer communities to support their renewable energy zoning needs. And now I'll pass things off to Ying to describe the program structure.
Thank you, Sarah. So after that, we developed the Michigan Renewable Energy Development Initiative Program. The MyReady was developed to help townships overcome zoning barriers identified during our interviews. Our main goal were to design a comprehensive support program and pilot it with selected townships to test its effectiveness and refine it further. And the three pillars of MyReady are resource assessment, community engagement, and zoning assistance. So over a 6-month period, we worked closely with pilot communities to engage them and promote proactive zoning practices. Next slide, please. Thanks. For pilot selection, we evaluated townships based on some key factors like land availability, the need for resource assessment and zoning support, and environmental justice considerations. These processes led us to select Negaunee Township and Milton Township in Michigan as our first two pilots, each with distinct community profiles, but facing very similar renewable energy zoning challenges. Now let's move on to the first part of MyReady, the resource assessment. For the purpose of helping townships understand the resource potential, transmission infrastructure, and site suitability in their community, we used what used to be called the Energy Zones Mapping Tool to find out the suitability for solar and wind development. And then we used their parcel data in ArcGIS to create buffer setbacks to better visualize different development scenarios under different setbacks. You can see here we have some examples on the left. You can see the differences with different setback buffers and what it can tell us in terms of potential project sites and the electricity generation it can bring. So based on the feedback learned from the pilot, we enhanced the resource assessment model as we scale up the program after the capstone project finished. These improvements better align with Michigan's unique landscape and more realistic development needs. For instance, we adjusted the suitability score by incorporating agricultural land scores, and we also modified the solar potential weight to be 0 and added weight to the land cover parameter. The example maps on the right illustrate the updated resources we provide to community who attend our current technical assistant workshops called Renewable Energy Academy, which Zona will explain in more detail later. And here is our second part of MyREDI, which is a 6-month-long community engagement process. Here's a brief overview of how this unfolded. So we began with the mailer and surveys into every household in the pilot community to gather some initial feedback. And this was followed by a town hall meeting to discuss the insights. And then we sent out a second mailer and held a final town hall featuring an interactive worksheet that captured zoning preferences for specific zoning items in both solar and wind. On the screen, you can see the example mailer and worksheet we provided to our pilots. So this process not only informed us of community perspective on renewable energy, but also provided a basis for zoning preferences, which is a key component to our last part of the program. The whole process was partnered with educators from Michigan State University Extension in terms of survey review and town hall facilitation. And now I'll hand it to Sophie to go through some survey results that we gathered through this process.
Thanks, Yingxin. Yeah, so diving in a little bit deeper to what Yingxin was talking about, we sent out surveys to each township prior to holding the town hall meetings to get a gauge on residents' general feelings about utility scale wind and solar, including any specific topics that they wanted to learn more about during the town hall or any questions that they might have had. These pie charts here show a snapshot of those survey results where we asked residents what their impression of a large-scale solar project in their township was. And as you can see, a larger share of respondents in Milton felt that such a project absolutely does not belong in their township, as shown in the dark blue, while Negaunee respondents were more mixed. Next slide. We then worked with township officials and MSU Extension staff to design and host the town hall meetings, during which we addressed questions and comments that were raised in the survey. Attendees were then asked to fill out worksheets with their preferences on different zoning considerations for utility scale wind and solar. This here shows an example from one of the worksheet questions where we asked participants to rank the items that they felt were most important when establishing a setback for wind projects, such as wildlife concerns, turbine collapse, ice throw, etc. Next slide. After the final town hall meetings, the MyREDI team compiled the zoning worksheet results to fill out draft ordinances for each township, and we used these based on MSU Extension's sample zoning templates for wind and solar. The zoning items that received the majority of votes were then incorporated as recommendations into these draft ordinances, which we then shared with township officials. And it's worth noting that both townships were silent on utility scale solar, but they did have utility scale wind ordinances in place, so we used that existing language as much as possible. For many worksheet preference on answer. Now you can go to the next slide. Zooming out, we wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments that came out of this project. While there were limitations, the piloting process facilitated more public engagement than the township officials had seen before, leaving both townships on the path to be proactively zoned for utility scale solar. While local participation is generally seen as a hindrance to solar and wind development, the pilot showed that when approached in a supportive and community-centered way, local participation can also drive the zoning process in ways that understand the root of local preferences and incorporate those preferences. Next slide. So upon completing the project in 2023, we knew that future iterations of the program would benefit from additional piloting, particularly with a more diverse set of pilots in terms of demographic characteristics, land availability, existing opposition to renewables, including other factors. More piloting would also provide the opportunity to test out new methodologies in terms of community engagement and resource assessment. We also felt that for MyReady to be successful, there would need to be some sort of additional incentive funding for townships to participate, as well as dedicated MyReady staff to implement the program long-term. Next slide. Lastly, we felt that establishing a statewide network of partners who understand local dynamics and can serve as trusted messengers in communities would be crucial to achieving these goals. And now I'll hand it off to Zona to talk about how all of this panned out.
Okay, so now that it's been a year and a half since the conclusion of the capstone project, let's take a look at where we're at. Upon graduation, Eagle did hire 3 of our capstone team members, including Yingshin and myself, to continue improving the MyReady program as full-time employees in the Energy Services Unit. Since securing more federal dollars, more full-time employees are planned to be hired through Eagle and through partner organizations to continue all of this planning and zoning work as well. And while we were still working on this project, one of our team members wrote a memo to Eagle's Office of Climate and Energy on behalf of the MyReady team, explaining the need for these incentive dollars for local governments to proactively plan, zone, and permit renewables. And thankfully, we had a lot of champions in government that believed our project was groundbreaking. And when Governor Whitmer announced her 2023-2024 annual budget, $30 million were allocated to fund Renewables Ready communities. And that allocation is now the Renewables Ready Communities Award, which awards local governments that host or permit large-scale renewable energy projects with up to $5,000 per megawatt to use to the benefit of their community in however way they choose. And recently, Eagle applied for and received $129 million from the EPA to continue this program with the goal of accelerating renewable energy permitting to help reach our state's goals of 60% renewable energy by 2030. And lastly, our team applied for and received $1.9 million from the DOE's Renewable Energy Siting and Technical Engagement and Planning Grant, RCEP, with which we established a collaborative-based technical assistance and community engagement program that was based off of MyReady, that we're calling the Renewable Energy Academy. And we're developing all kinds of materials and resources to assist local governments in making well-informed planning and zoning decisions around renewables through that new program. And since the new legislation was passed establishing a state renewables siting authority, we've used this funding to also hold workshops across the state to help prepare local governments for a new and complicated renewables planning landscape, using everything that we've learned from MyReady as that foundation. The original plan was to establish a MyReady network of organizations all working together towards the same goal. And while the acronym MyReady has been abandoned, unfortunately, we've adopted a new branding with the same objectives, the Renewable Energy Academy. And we've succeeded in establishing a comprehensive and collaborative network of organizations focused on this topic. Our official REA partner organizations include U of M's Center for Empowering Communities, MSU Extension, Michigan Association of Planning, and Five Lakes Energy. But we also often collaborate with Michigan's Department of Labor and Economic Opportunities Office for Rural Prosperity, Michigan's Townships Association, and the Michigan Public Service Commission. And this network has really contributed to the lowering of silos and open communication across organizations to ensure that we're really identifying the most effective methods of implementing all of our renewable energy programs. So here's a visual of how things played out. Our capstone ended in spring of 2023, and a couple of months later, $30 million were allocated to Renewables Ready communities. Fall of 2023, Public Act 233 was passed that established the new siting authority, and we had to kind of completely adapt our programs to a new siting landscape. By spring 2024, we received the RSTEP dollars to establish the Renewable Energy Academy with our partner organizations, develop materials and tools to offer through the Academy. And finally, in fall 2024, we received $129 million of CPRG funding from the EPA to expand all of the programs that I've just mentioned. Here's some snapshots of us in action at our workshops. We provide presentations, we hold interactive activities for local officials. It's all focused on proactive and renewable energy planning and zoning and considering your priorities when you're thinking about these technologies. And here are the web pages for both of the programs that were born out of our little capstone project, MyREDI. So in conclusion, MyREDI created the foundation for programs that are now critical to the Michigan's Healthy Climate Plan's goals, and did so while empowering participatory planning at the local level. And the concept of MyREDI established a precedent of transparency, collaboration, and proactivity in Michigan's energy transition that our formal official programs at Eagle now fully embrace. And the key to all of this was, being innovative and finding ways to synergize state and local goals at the same time. All right. Thank you very much for listening. And I now will pass it to MEDC.
All right, let's get into the Michigan Economic Development Redevelopment Ready Communities Toolkit. So, Cass, we want to go on to the next slide. So yeah, today we're just going to just go over how we got to where we are with the Redevelopment Ready Communities Toolkit. But first, a little background information on the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. We're a statewide economic development organization committed to enabling upward economic mobility of all Michiganders. So we're deploying strategic focus area traditionally around economic development, but also place, but we do naturally weave that in. So historically, economic development has been, you can go back to the previous one. I don't know if it's on a timer yet, but we've been focused on business attraction and retention. So we take a holistic approach that is not just looking at business development projects, but at people and places. So people are looking to the place first, where they're looking for a job, so outdoor recreation, shopping, maybe even before we consider maybe even before you're looking for a job that you're looking for this place, according to the Grow Michigan report that we have. And then through these efforts, we're focused on supporting community to increase their vibrancy and power to attract greater investment. So on the next slide, through the Redevelopment Ready Communities Toolkit, it's administered by us at the MEDC. We assist municipalities in streamlining their foundational planning, zoning, economic development practices to support community-driven reinvestment development. So communities can achieve 2 designations. It could either be an essentials or certification. So over the past 11 years, MEDC, we've successfully deployed this across the state of Michigan. We have over 300 plus communities that are engaged in RRC, 77 that are certified, about 24 that are officially essentials aligned. So we facilitate this access to statewide economic development tools, ensuring Michigan's investment in the form of real estate development, gap financing, public space activation grants, or business attraction retention efforts are aligned with the state's overarching economic vision. So it's important to know that, RC is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So each community has its own unique challenges, and it's really up to the community how they embrace the toolkit and how it's administered in the community. So really, RC Toolkit should be viewed as a guiding framework that can be leveraged by local leaders to inspire organizational change within their municipalities to meet their community needs of growth. So this change can be as simple as like posting a development fee schedule online, or can be much more involved as updating the zoning ordinance to permit missing middle housing. So next, to the true stuff that we're trying to get to. So while yes, we're working with communities around some best practices to help kind of build that framework for planning, zoning, economic development. When communities are certified, what do you do next? Or even essentials. And then there's additional supplemental best practices that you can do, but then we got hit with COVID. So this initiative really began with starting out some immediate strategies. So these are available on the website on myplace.org, and you can just search Resiliency Toolkit. And it outlines really in the beginning some low cost or free actions communities can take to address areas where the pandemic may have disrupted local systems. So from the start, we knew the primary goal was to help communities long term, but we also recognized that there were numerous resources that were already available. So for a city manager, village administrator, the township administrator, the challenge often lies in knowing where to start. Where do I begin? What's most important? How should the resources and funding be prioritized, right? And obviously there's plans in place, but when you talk about resiliency and we're looking holistically, not just climate, how can we prepare a community to identify where they should begin? So that's where the toolkit comes in. So it's really designed to guide communities of all sizes to ask these questions and helping them make informed decisions and build resiliency effectively within their plans.
All right. So as planners, we know that resilience and sustainability are becoming increasingly intertwined in the work that we do. And as Pablo noted, the toolkit emerged from our community's need to make this connection more practical and actionable. And so before we dive into the specific pilot projects that we've been working on with Kat, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how we structured this toolkit. And importantly, the framework that we are going to outline helps communities build on their existing sustainability initiatives and planning efforts while strengthening their capacity to handle disruptions. And so as a resilience framework, our Michigan Toolkit emphasizes the practical implementation for Michigan communities at the local level, whether they're in the Upper Peninsula or urban cores. And so we've designed this framework to present resilience as a proactive growth opportunity rather than just risk mitigation to better resonate with local stakeholders and elected officials. So next slide. And we've structured this framework around 4 pillars that align with sustainable community development, places, people, infrastructure, and economy. And then each pillar emphasizes both the immediate resilience and long-term sustainability goals. Starting with place, the places pillar encompasses both physical spaces as well as the systems that support them. And so this includes parks, cultural sites, historic buildings, but also the natural and built environments that impact the daily life of people that live in these communities. What's unique here is the focus on how these places are shaped by planning tools. So our land use policies, development practices, management strategies, and this connects directly to the planning processes while also adding a bit of a resilience lens. Next. So the people pillar. People who form the foundation of community resilience. We look at both individual scales and collective scales for communities, from how residents exercise their voices and actions to how social groups and organizations can help build community momentum. For planners, this means considering how our decisions affect social networks, cultural institutions, and community capacity. And all of those have very distinct ramifications for the resilience of a community. Strong social connections have been proven very important during disruptions, and it makes this pillar very important to overall resilience. Next. Infrastructure is often one of those things that can be both our greatest challenge and opportunity when planning in communities. As systems age, we have to consider not just the replacement, but future stresses and shocks and how those are going to impact the systems that exist. While infrastructure investments can be costly upfront, failing to consider the resilience ramifications for not investing can lead to even costlier catastrophes in the long run. And for planners, this means thinking beyond traditional infrastructure planning to consider system interdependencies and future adaptation needs. Next. Then finally, the economy pillar focuses on managing available community resources. And the success of the local economy depends on active participation from across the entire economic ecosystem, from suppliers and businesses to employees and consumers. And for planners, this means considering how our decisions affect local economic relationships and creating flexibility for adaptation. And so ensuring that you've got, for example, a diverse business base to build in that flexibility. And so a resilient economy supports sustainability while also providing stability during these disruptions. And the toolkit ultimately helps communities enhance resilience across all of these pillars in practical ways and really accessible ways, as Pablo mentioned. It guides cities and communities to evaluate their current trends, assess staff capacity, identify potential partners, leverage existing initiatives, all to kind of build on the work that they're already doing. We designed this self-assessment as a foundational first step, helping communities understand their current resilience status and identify critical gaps. We've been working to develop and test a scorecard to further streamline this assessment process and make it more accessible to all communities without needing to necessarily engage us or to get started ahead of us. And what's important here is that communities don't need to start from scratch. The resilience, again, can build on their existing efforts and work that they're already doing in their communities. And so with that, Kat is going to talk to you about some of the pilot communities we've been working with.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Something that we've really loved in getting to develop this toolkit with MEDC is that not only have they made this free and available to all, but also they believe very firmly in practicing what you preach. And so not only were we able to create this toolkit, but we were able to work hands-on with communities that are part of their RRC program to implement this in their own communities. We started this off with a pilot program in 3 different areas. All 3 of these communities just so happened to be doing their master planning process at the same time that we were engaging with them, which for those of you who don't know, this is a really key and incredible opportunity to get involved and to start talking about resilience. Because it not only gives us an opportunity to chat with city staff, with their stakeholders as well about this, but it also gives us a community to chat about it with the broader community and the public in a way that thinks really future forward. And so with that, the way that we kind of started is we walked them through the toolkit piece by piece. When they would walk into it at the very beginning of this, you'll be able to see a self-assessment. And we were able to kind of tailor this to the community. And it all really starts with getting the right people at the table. This is how we started in developing the toolkit. And we believed that this is really important when we start engaging communities and applying it as well. Not only do you need to have the right people from your own community at the table, but you also need to have those various stakeholders, people from your broader region, as well as key experts to kind of help guide you along the way. What one city planner may know or your housing coordinator may know will be very different from your DDA coordinator, from the leaders at Habitat for Humanity, from the leaders who are working over at Eagle. And so having everybody at the same table to talk all about how we define resilience, what we see as the biggest issues that we are tackling, the actions that we are currently taking, helps to establish a really streamlined baseline and helps set a foundation for success. From there, we worked with communities to really tailor this to whatever engagement methods they were doing. So this included having working sessions both with the public and with their city councils and existing forums. We were able to use social media to ask targeted questions. We were able to do surveys as well using the exact format that is in the toolkit. We even had some slightly more fun and engaging techniques. So right here over on the right-hand side, you see some of our colleagues over in Midland who had done a series of sessions over at happy hours and trivia nights throughout the city to have conversations with community members all about what resilience means to them. And we were able to use that feedback when we started off the process. From there, you're able to go into the toolkit and it provides you a series of examples of shocks and stressors, which Pablo and Alicia had talked all about. Those shocks being these kind of major disruptions that some communities can be facing. When we were chatting with Midland, they had just had a major dam break that they were recovering from, which is a huge shock that was very present on people's mind, versus sometimes you'll see more so stressors, such as what we were facing in Marquette with a growing housing market. And a lack of affordable housing options that they were facing, which was what we kept hearing throughout engagement. So you're able to go through this series of shocks and stressors outlined in the toolkit and identify not only the ones that people find really present, but also see which ones maybe they aren't talking about and be able to identify why. Is it because it's just not as pressing currently? Is it because there is a need for more education? People just aren't aware of it. However, it could be really pressing here in the near future. So these are all things that we want to keep in mind. From there, we go into solutions and actions. In the toolkit, we not only have a sample of actions that are categorized from the information and education that you could be doing, the engagement that could be happening, or even regulatory efforts such as zoning policies or programs that could be enacted depending on the political will and the funding that's available to you and to your community are all options. We kind of go through these with our communities and apply which ones we think would be able to be very successful in the short term versus in the long term, which ones aren't, which ones they're already presently doing. And from there, determine how we're going to communicate that with the public, whether that be through educational sessions, through informational one-pagers. This is an example of one that we had done in Ferndale where we were finding that they were doing a lot on the city side. And we're able to push more on how community members could be very active in helping the city on their resilience journey. And finally, from there, we also include free metrics and resources that people can use to track how they are doing over time. This is really getting at that scorecard that Alicia had talked all about. These are all updated resources. We look at them every single year to be sure that they are still free and available. You can click on them at any point and be able to go directly to these areas to find not only data that is regularly updated by national and state platforms, but you can also find different resources within them as well to help you out on your journey. Here's an example where we've taken this actually outside of Michigan, working at Smith Group. We were very inspired by the work of MEDC and have used this in other states as well, such as Wisconsin. Right here, you'll see an example that we've done for one in Jenny's own backyard. In Virginia, where we were doing a land use plan, and we'd use a lot of the information and resources within the toolkit to help us inform a more resiliency based strategy for a flood zone area where we were looking at potential future development scenarios. So with that, we would love to chat all about what's next because the work is never done. And so with that, Pablo, do you want to share some of the exciting next steps that y'all are working on?
Yeah. So I think key here is we're not trying to create a whole new resource here. We're more just, again, just a reminder, we're trying to prioritize how communities are looking and making sure that they are defining resiliency, because every community is very unique in Michigan. We're not going to have the same characteristics in Traverse City than what's going to happen in Detroit, right? Or like in Marquette, it's not going to be the same as Detroit. So we really need to get in there and do an educational, what resiliency means to you as a community. We're learning, we're growing. So it's a couple years old. So we're trying to figure out new ways and improve ways to get more people to use the toolkit. So you've seen that we've used it in 3 other communities. We're anticipating working with some 3 upcoming ones, people communities that are probably already more established in terms of what type of green infrastructure or sustainable goals that they've identified, like Traverse City, or starting out new, like the city of Alpena and potentially East Point near the Detroit area. But really that scorecard that's being developed is going to be key to kind of measuring where you stand. So kind of gives you like a 1 through 5, the different categories within the toolkit. So you're able to sit down, maybe find out where with that toolkit you're trying to prioritize what's important to you as a community, kind of measure that out and prioritize where you should begin, and then point out to those resources that you've seen that were identified in the toolkit that we update on an annual basis. So I think really we're continuing to learn, where we adapt, and as the toolkit grows or resources grow, or we're seeing how we can better implement, like even Catherine was saying, this is not just intended for redevelopment ready communities. Any community in Michigan, or even a community outside of Michigan, kind of R&D, rip off and duplicate what we've developed here for their state.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. I'm going to pull up our contact info slide. We've got info for all the speakers here. Please feel free to reach out to them if you had any questions that don't get answered today. I also want to note, before I forget, we've got one other awards webinar on December 4th. I believe it's for from 2 to 3 p.m. We've got a team from Baltimore and a team from Hawaii. So the opposite of today, we're both in Michigan. We're going both sides of the country next time. So please join us for that one if you're available. But we do have about 15 minutes, and I know I have some questions for our speakers, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. I wanted to note and go back, there was a question in the chat earlier, because I meant to disable the chat just so we didn't get distracted, but I thought it was really good, a clarification that someone asked about what the meaning is of silently zoned, and it was clarified that zoning that refers to zoning ordinances that are silent on the subject of utility scale wind or solar in this case, right? They don't address that in their zoning ordinances. That's correct? Okay, great. So thank you all for clarifying that in the chat, and thank you for that question. I have one question. I have a lot of questions, as I said, but one thing just came to mind as we were listening to the MEDC presentation, and I think, Pablo, I think you started to address it, is that there's so many different types of communities in Michigan and obviously in every state, but you mentioned, it can be used for lots of different types of communities. Does it scale to sort of a neighborhood level versus like a statewide level, or is there sort of a specific size of community that might work best with this framework?
The intent was for all sizes. So from as small as a community that has a population of 600 to a community that has over 10,000. It's really scaled for anybody. You can build the assessment to make it fit for what's right for your community. That was the whole intent around this, because we understand that a lot of municipalities here, there's one person that's the city manager. They're also the person that's doing the enforcement. They're also probably out directing traffic, I learned recently, out putting their vest on. So it's really scaling it and making it fit for every community and every size.
Right. I wanted to ask the students, and first of all, I'm sorry I kept saying Michigan Ready during the intro when it's my Ready. Messed that up. I'm from Wisconsin originally, so you can blame it on that. But I want to ask the students, so obviously a lot of you're no longer students, I think, or maybe you're working and going to school, but I want to ask sort of from your perspective as students, what did you feel like you learned in this process that you might not have learned in a classroom otherwise? Because I know when I was in grad school, the sort of capstone project was really it brought to mind so many things I never would have thought of in class. So I'm interested to hear some lessons learned that you had from that process.
Sophie, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go. I feel like it gave us a really valuable glimpse into how local government works, because before starting grad school, I didn't know what zoning was. I had never even heard of zoning. Maybe I was super naive and lived under a rock, but just being able to actually get out there and see how local government operates and what kind of things they're considering in their energy zoning, or what needs to be considered in energy zoning, was really a valuable experience for me. I don't know if any of the others on the team want to speak to that.
I think also, absolutely yes. And like the training, I guess, of like working with a state government and like having a client and like having to figure out like they have their goals and their priorities and objectives with this project, and your communities that you're working with, who are kind of your mini clients and your pilot communities, have their own goals and priorities going through this project, and figuring out how to get those to align. I think that was a really valuable real world experience for us.
Definitely. Great. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing those insights. I think it's just interesting to hear. It's good to have variety in school, I think. Let's see. We have a question in the Q&A which I will publish here. For the Michigan Ready folks, you mentioned an update since the My Ready. I did it again. The My Ready folks, you mentioned an update since the project's completion regarding state involvement versus local jurisdictions. How do you all anticipate the state's involvement policy-wise affecting the project going forward? or how has it if it has?
Yeah, so Public Act 233 was passed last fall, and it basically created an option for renewable energy developers to seek permitting at the Michigan Public Service Commission if a local government did not pass a zoning ordinance that matched every single zoning item that was kind of written in the law. So kind of took away a sense of local preference and local control in terms of considering and hosting these technologies. And so the way that we adapted was we kind of had to, like, when we made this program, it was, how do you proactively zone? It didn't really matter what was in your zoning ordinance. As long as you're being proactive about it, you're considering the impacts, and you're codifying these technologies into your zoning ordinance, and you're no longer silent. And now it's more of, okay, do you want to be compatible with this law? How do you pass a zoning ordinance that does so? And if you don't really care about being compatible with the law and maybe want to take your risks, like, how can you still keep a developer working with you locally? And so teaching local governments how to pass zoning ordinances that might not make a developer not want to work with them anymore. So it's basically like veering them away from restrictive zoning ordinances.
Thank you. One thing I always like to ask, and I'm looking at some of my notes, trying to read my questions, but one thing I always like to ask all of our webinar speakers, and I guess this from the My REDI program, you might have already thought about this with the other question I asked, but sort of what was something that really jumped out to you, something unexpected that you learned through this process that you think others could benefit from knowing, sort of a really key lesson learned, if there's anything that comes to mind? I think you've already shared some of them, but if there's anything in addition.
I'll share personally. I think in today's landscape, we understand that sometimes terms like resiliency or climate action can be very divisive or slightly triggering depending on people's personal experiences. But the reality is that a lot of times, more often than not, people are very aligned in terms of wanting to have a better quality of life and wanting to feel more prepared and more in control when it comes to the future of their communities. And so being able to have conversations and being able to take kind of some of those terms out of it and to talk all about what is the future of your ability to afford a home in your community. What does it look like to shop in your downtown? What does it look like to walk to work? What does it look like to walk your children to school? And having those types of conversations can help you understand the baseline of where people really want to go without having to worry about the politics that are involved behind it. So when it comes to a lot of these initiatives, and I think what was really inspiring in seeing the student work as well is that something that can be even divisive, like alternative energy, can be really simplified when we think about it in terms of something that people and planners use every day, such as zoning or policy or things like that. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of a different lens, which is really exciting and fun and cool to have learned throughout this process.
Great. Yeah, I've definitely found that too. That sort of like values-based community input to feed into a process. Yeah. Others, no pressure if you don't have anything to share, but any thoughts from others?
Yeah, I guess that my takeaway is honestly similar. There's a lot of power in just asking people how they feel about decisions that are being made in their community and reaching out to them, actively hearing their concerns and making an effort to involve people in the processes that are shaping their community instead of just maybe asking people's thoughts and not, acting on them or just doing it to check off a box. It's really important to take those concerns seriously because they do, shape what the community is, like community goals and how people perceive quality of life in their community. So just taking stakeholder and community engagement really seriously was definitely a big takeaway for me.
That's a good one. Thanks. Well, let's see. Oh, we do have one more question. We'll take this as our last question. For the MEDC folks, as you expand the communities involved in working with your toolkit, what do you all consider at the beginning of working with the community for the future implementation process for the toolkit?
Can you repeat that again? I think I lost you kind of communication.
Yeah. As you expand the communities that you're involved in working, or as you expand the communities involved in working with your toolkit, what do you consider sort of when you're starting out at the beginning of working with them to think as you work towards sort of future implementation for the toolkit? I think is what.
Being willing. I think a lot of it, like Catherine kind of alluded to, it's hard to kind of come in and tell you, you gotta think of it from a different framework versus coming in, oh, this is important, this is why you should do it. I think it needs to come down from the city or the villages or the community that we're working with, and a willingness to kind of tackle this and how you frame, okay, what happens if 3 businesses within your downtown leave? What do you do? What happens when your park downtown all of a sudden just gets flooded? Is there an action to kind of address that? What happens when, oh my God, we're experiencing right now, usually we have the UP, Upper Peninsula 200. We're not having a lot of snow. So these communities that really rely on their winter activities, what are they going to do to respond to not having like this usual big, sled racing dog that you have every year? So it's really, if you take it from that framework and how it affects their community, and maybe get that buy-in from their willingness, that's what really we need to kind of instill and get from the communities in order for this to work. Because we can't come in and tell you, well, you need to do this. It needs to be like, okay, let's educate you and kind of what it means, but you need to kind of get that framework and how it would affect your community. And then I think you get more buy-in that way, and like, okay, yeah, we really need to take a look at this and try to address some of these items that need to happen in case we do see those, those shocks coming in because of the stresses that we have in our community.
That makes sense. Yeah, sort of making sure it matters to them by getting feedback on what matters most to sort of build off on the process. Great. Well, thank you, Pablo. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. So thank you all for spending your hour with us here. Thanks to the speakers and the attendees. And please feel free to reach out to any of the speakers if you have any other questions. But thank you all again. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.